We had two Premier League managers fired in the same weekend, and you know I love talking about managers getting fired because so much of it is so ridiculous. But Graham Potter with Chelsea and Brendan Rodgers with Leicester City are two totally different situations, and we're going to break it down here on Stoppage Time. Alright, so busy weekend in the managerial world. Graham Potter getting fired by Chelsea. Before that, Brendan Rodgers getting let go by Leicester City. And they're two really unique situations, and I find both of them absolutely fascinating. Starting with Rodgers and Leicester City. Now, this is a guy who's a good coach. He's been there for a little over 4 years, parts of 5 seasons, and he's had success. They won an FA Cup. They've been mid-table. They've had some good seasons. And he's going to get another job. No problem. I'm typically the one arguing, that clubs made these moves too quickly. This is reactionary. You succumb to fan pressure, and you're firing managers too soon. You're going to hear me make all those arguments later about Graham Potter and Chelsea, but not with Brendan Rodgers and Leicester City. If anything, they may have given him too much leash and held on too long, and here's why. It's not about whether or not Brendan Rodgers can coach, or if he's a good tactician, or a motivator of men, or any of the things that go into being a good manager. It's that he seemed to have given up, and so had the players. That's really been the story of the Leicester season is, did anybody care? Did anybody want to be there? From very early on, it looked as though it was a bunch of players and a manager who knew they weren't going to be here in the next season, and they played as such. And that's a reflection on the manager, and that's a reflection on the players themselves too. It's almost as though Rodgers realized that Leicester did not fortify the team properly this offseason. And that's an important detail to note. They did not spend the money the way they needed to reinforce this roster. They have lost so many good, talented young players over the past few years, and they really haven't reinforced it properly, and when they have spent, they haven't spent it well. And so this season was not set up to succeed for Leicester City, but it's almost like Rodgers knew that, and knew that this was going to be a failure from the start, and it sure felt like he coached them as such. Now, that's an outsider's point of view. I'm not in the locker room. I'm not in the media there to see it firsthand, but that's what it reflected like on the field. Every game was just sort of, do they want to be there? How hard are they trying? And it's not like they weren't running after the ball, but you can tell that motivation, that it factor, that they just didn't have this year. And sometimes it comes from on-field leadership, and they're missing some of that. They have had injuries, absolutely an excuse. But at some point, that comes back to the manager. And is he saying the right things? And is he motivating people the right way? And it just clearly was not happening. So the time had come, and probably had come a few months ago, to part ways with Rodgers, as he's been linked with a lot of other big jobs. And, boy, sure looked and felt like he had one foot out the door. And the performance on the field reflected it. And you have to wonder, as Leicester sits currently in 19th, is this going to cost them their spot in the Premier League, the loyalty to Brendan Rodgers? And so while I'm typically arguing, hey, don't be reactionary, don't, let the fans get in your ear and fire coaches every other week, there is something to be said for, keeping your spot in the Premier League. The question I always ask is, has something changed? Or did we learn something new about the manager that we don't like? What did change with Leicester and Brendan Rodgers was the effort and the attitude on the field. And that intensity that made Leicester a formidable opponent and tough to play. And that went away. I don't know the answer to that question, the did we learn something new or did they change as a manager question, in terms of Chelsea and Graham Potter. Because what could have changed in the past 7 months? Now, Chelsea fans, and not incorrectly so, will destroy his tactics. In his final game, he had Reece James playing in a back three as a center back, which is a waste of his talents. So things of that nature, and there's a million cases you can pinpoint out there as to why they wanted him fired. But I ask the question: did he all of a sudden forget how to come up with promising football tactics? Did he just become a bad tactician when he got to Chelsea? That doesn't seem likely. Graham Potter had tremendous success at Brighton for years. He didn't forget how to coach when he got to Chelsea. Now, I've heard arguments, well, he's not a good enough coach to be at that level. That suggests tactician. But to me, when you are at a lesser club, and I hate saying lesser, but you know what I mean by that, a not as financially fulfilled club as a club like Chelsea. So Brighton, a club where you generally have to make do with less talent on the pitch, let's put it that way. That's where tactics make up the difference. Am I missing something here? He can't have been a bad tactician all this time, and I will admit I haven't dived deep into the tactics of Brighton from the Graham Potter era. So please chime in below, subscribe, comment for me if you have some insight there. But he can't have been a genuinely bad tactician all of that time, and then had these clubs overachieving the way Brighton did, which is what got him the damn Chelsea job in the first place, right? So he couldn't have been too bad as a tactician, and maybe he was just this incredible leader of men, but he doesn't strike me as that kind of manager. So there had to be some tactics there, and then he gets to Chelsea. Now, was he trying to pigeonhole players into a system that didn't fit? There's probably some elements of that. But I tend to give a little latitude when you've had the incredible amount of roster turnover that Chelsea has had during his very short stay there. I mean, what they did this winter in the January window was nothing short of astonishing. And I'm not necessarily talking about the amount of money spent, although that too, but just the amount of players brought in. And you can't just plug and place these guys. This isn't an all-star team, and then you expect them to play as a cohesive unit. It doesn't work that way. You can't just drop guys in like it's FIFA. It doesn't work. And so what was he supposed to do? How much training did they really get? Mihailo Modric, how much training has he really received with Graham Potter? Where are the tactics coming into play here? So, in typical Chelsea fashion, it's just so reactionary, knee-jerk. Todd Bowley, you're just an American Roman Abramovich, is what it seems like, which is very much a generalization, but, do something to fight that stereotype, please. Because this isn't it. This is just falling right into the old Chelsea trap of new manager every few months. And so the Graham Potter firing really bothers me because I want to know the answer to the question, what happened between 7 months ago and now that makes Graham Potter not a good manager anymore, or not the manager for this job? Did we learn something new about Graham Potter? Is it that he's not a good tactician? If so, why didn't we know that before? If the issue here of firing Graham Potter is that he's a bad clinical tactician and a strategist, right, and he's not going to get the most out of players, how did anybody at Chelsea not know that 7 months ago? That's the question I would like answered. Was there no research being done? Was it just, he's winning with another club, let's get him? Honestly, that might be the case. I would not shock me. But is that really all that went into this? Did nobody scout him, research him the way they do players? I don't understand how we get from A to B without having learned something new. He didn't just forget how to coach. Do stars not respond to him? Maybe there's something there. Maybe you need a bigger name coach because you've got bigger name players. There's egos at play. I have not heard reports of that, so I'm not leaning that way. It just sounds like you've got a club that is poorly put together, a bunch of all-stars, a bunch of highly paid big names come together. They don't fit a cohesive system. The new coach hasn't had time to implement the proper system because he came in mid-season himself, and the whole thing's just a complete disaster, and somebody needs a full offseason and a plan of not just getting expensive players and big names, but players that fit a system of a coach who's going to be there for more than 8 months. So that's how you build a team, and money can't outspend those sorts of issues. So I'm really struggling with the Graham Potter one. I'm not shocked. Nothing about this was shocking, but it just doesn't make any sense, and it sounds like another overreactionary sort of response to a bunch of losses and a bad season. Brendan Rodgers, on the other hand, definitely seemed like it was time, probably overdue. At the end of the day, 11 Premier League teams have made a coaching change this season. That is over half the league, and that is absolutely insane. So I'm going to keep banging this drum about too many coaching changes in the Premier League, too many reactionary decisions. These are billion-dollar businesses. Is this really how they're run? You lose a few games and the guy gets the boot and you start the whole thing over? There's no cohesive system, no strategy. It's, the fans are getting tired, let's get rid of this guy. And it's absolutely insane. 11 out of 20 teams have made a managerial change. That is astonishing, and it needs to stop. Thanks as always for joining us here on Stoppage Time at Pints and Punditry. Go hit that subscribe button for me. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at TotalFIFACM. Hit the comments below. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Chime in if you think somebody's going to be the next manager of Chelsea or of Leicester City. There's a lot of names flying out there. I'd love to hear your opinion and get the discussion going. Thanks as always for joining us. This is Total FIFA Career Mode.